only now are journalists, universally culled from the Ivy Leagues and these upper class schools. In fact, I was part of that generation of sort of rich kids who went into journalism. When my father went into it, he started when he was 18. Journalism was more of a trade than a profession. It wasn't necessary to have a college education. And most of the people who went into it, they had kind of a natural antipathy for people in power.
Yes.
They overwhelmingly sided with the ordinary person, just reflexively. And they were, they told the news from that perspective very often, right? And it was the classic editorialist at the time was somebody like, Jimmy Breslin or Mike Royko, this sort of voice of the people kind of a thing. And so I grew up always imagining that the reporter was somebody who was on the side of ordinary people. And
because he was one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, my father carried it that way for sure. And so
Did your father never go to college?
No, he did. He went to Rutgers. He had me while he was at Rutgers. That's why he had to go into reporting. He worked at the Home News in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And then, as soon as he graduated, he went into TV. But no, I always had this vision of journalism as this thing that, it wasn't for intellectuals. It wasn't for, people who had graduate degrees. It was for people who hustled, who worked hard and had, kind of a common touch, right? Like that's kind of the key to the job, is being willing to listen to people and all that. So I had a very specific idea of what journalism was when I went into it. I just thought I wasn't going to be particularly good at it because of that, deficit, right? Like I didn't have that gift that he had. But I started overseas in Russia, and because I was able to, I spoke Russian already early, I had an advantage over other American reporters at the time.
What year did you go to Russia?
So I studied in 89 and 90 when it was still Soviet. I took a year and a half abroad and then went back as soon as I graduated. Actually, I went back before I graduated and started stringing and working for a bunch of different organizations there, and finally got a job at an expat paper.
So 91-ish?
Yeah, 91-ish, 92. Right after the revolution, basically. Yeah.
Which was
91. Yeah.
August.
Yeah.
Summer.
August 91.
Yeah.
So shortly after that.
What was it like?
It was amazing. It was the Wild West, the funny thing for me is people ask me, why did I love Russia so much? The first reason is that all my favorite writers growing up were Russians, and my, Nikolai Gogol was my hero. I wanted to be a comic novelist, and the Russians have so many amazingly funny writers, as you know, right?
Yeah.
From Bulgakov to Dovlatov, all these people. I wanted to learn the language. Then when I got there, I had been a very depressed teenager, had, struggled socially, behaviorally, all these other things. I got to late Soviet Russia and everybody's depressed. And, nobody's happy. And I thought, this is amazing. I fit right in. And
you had a dark Slavic soul and you didn't even know it?
Yeah, exactly. And in America, there's this incredible pressure on young people. You have to succeed right away, right?
Be cheerful.
Yeah, be cheerful, look good, be in shape, like all these other things. Russians, no way. There was none of that attitude. Nobody was going anywhere. And when I got there, that was just incredibly attractive to me. And so,
Well, I've never heard that take before. That is awesome.
No, it was really funny. And because of that, I got along with Russians in a way probably that other Americans didn't. I think there was a connection there that was very natural, and I really took to the place early on.
How did you speak the language?
Well, it's like anybody who you come to the United States. If you have no choice and you have to speak English, you'll learn it pretty quickly. So I studied in St. Petersburg, but then I briefly went to Uzbekistan because I had this idea that there weren't that many stringers in Uzbekistan, so I would get more work. And
for those who don't notice, I don't know that there are stringers anymore. What's a stringer?
So a stringer is like a person who is not on staff for a newspaper, but just sort of sits in a place and waits for something to happen. And then, like the New York Times or the AP will call them and say, hey, can you chase down that, thing that happened? In my case, an earthquake that happened in Kyrgyzstan gave me an early chance to write a couple of stories, right? And
who'd you write them for?
I think I wrote one for AP in 1991. I ended up getting thrown out of Uzbekistan because I had a bad visa. But while I was there, I really learned Russian because nobody there spoke English. And I also was on the Uzbek national baseball team, which was hilarious.
How?
So one day I was walking past one of the colleges and I saw people playing baseball. And I was going to keep walking. And then I thought, I'm in Uzbekistan. What is that? It turned out that there was, I think it was like a refrigeration school. And there were a whole bunch of students from Cuba. And, those guys could really play, right? So I just went and asked, you guys mind if I play with you? And so I ended up being a catcher on a team full of Cubans with a Russian coach, and we played other Central Asian countries, and it was hilarious. Yeah. We had ground rules. This is going to sound like a fake story, but it's true. We had ground rules when we played in a pasture. If you hit a sheep, it was a double. If you hit a cow, it was a double. If you hit a sheep, it was a triple. That is a true story. That actually
did anyone
happened.
ever hit a cow or sheep?
No. Not. We only played like 2 games in that place. So, but that actually happened. I was actually playing baseball when I got thrown out of the country.
So Uzbekistan in 1991 was not a first world place.
No, Uzbekistan was, it's kind of a typical Soviet satellite country. It was really struggling economically. It had all kinds of problems, environmentally. It used to be the big cotton producer for the Soviet Union. And then, that sort of dried up for a variety of reasons. The Sea of Azov is now gone. Right. So, it was a troubled place. There was a war going on in Tajikistan right next to us. And so it was an interesting place to be. But it was sort of my first experience.
What did your parents think?
My mother was terrified. When I got thrown out of the country, I got a visit by these people who were, I guess their word for it was the SNB, the Služba Nacionalna Bezopasnosti, which is just their version of the KGB. And they asked me for my papers. I had the wrong papers. I was there on a student visa that I'd kind of, was kind of phony. And but I had to send a telegram telling my parents that I'd been kicked out of the country. So I wrote, KGB kicking me out, will call from Moscow, but she got KGB kicking me gut, will call when I get to Moscow.
Being beaten to death by the KGB.
Yeah, so she was worried, but no, it was fine.
But your dad was for it?
Yeah, I think he thought the whole, adventure thing was interesting. And then when he finally visited Russia in the mid-90s, and saw what the place was like at the time, he thought it was, a paradise for journalists, which it was, because there was so much crazy stuff going on. And it was a great place to learn the profession, really. Yeah.
What was press freedom like then?
It was really interesting. There was a very vibrant community of really hardcore, great investigative reporters who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Because remember, the press had been suppressed almost completely for 80 years, right? And as soon as there was a little bit of an opening to do real reporting, there were suddenly these very brave reporters who showed up, and they were risking their lives every time they wrote, because the way the system was set up was that every newspaper was basically owned by a different gangster. And you would get material. They called it selling jeans over there, right? So somebody would give you a packet of information. You would write it up about the rival gangland figure or politician, but if they wanted you to pay the price, you might get shot in a doorway or something like that. So there were people who got killed by exploding briefcases. For instance, there was a guy named Dima Holodov who worked for Moskovsky Komsomolets when I was there, who had written about Yeltsin's defense minister. He got blown up in a train station. But the Russians, those guys were my heroes. I tagged on to a bunch of those people really early. And that's where I kind of really learned the whole investigative journalism thing was from those people. Not all of whom stayed in the business for very long, sometimes not voluntarily.
But you stayed 10 years.
Yes. Yeah.
How come?
I mean, I love the place. I was planning on staying forever, really.